I walked out without looking back. No dramatic exit, no tears streaking mascara down my cheeks. Just a cardboard box with a photo frame and a coffee mug carried through the service corridor at 6 in the morning while the building was still empty. 5 months pregnant, founder of the company, wife of the CEO. And now? None of those things. The security guard at the back entrance looked up from his phone, confused. He'd seen my badge 1,000 times. Brenda Washburn, Chief Technology Officer, co-founder. But I wasn't scanning in. I was walking out. I smiled at him, calm, almost peaceful. He didn't stop me. Something in my eyes told him not to. 40 minutes later, Paul woke up alone in our penthouse apartment. His hand reached across the silk sheets to my side of the bed. Cold, empty. On my nightstand, where my phone usually charged, there was only one thing: my wedding ring. No note, no explanation, no indication that his wife of 4 years had just erased herself from his life. He picked up the ring and stared at it. 3 carats, custom designed. He'd made sure the jeweler understood exactly how impressive it needed to look. For a full minute, he didn't move. Then he smiled, just slightly, the smile of a man who believed he'd finally won something he didn't know he was fighting for. He thought I'd finally broken. He had no idea I'd just finished building something else. The apartment was small. 600 square feet of cramped ambition in a building where the elevator broke twice a month and the neighbors fought loud enough to hear through the walls. I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on a pizza box, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled across my screen, the architecture of something that didn't exist yet but lived complete in my mind. Paul paced by the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice smooth as honey. "No, I understand your concerns, but let me ask you this. What if I told you we could cut your processing time by 60%? Not 50, 60. He caught my eye and winked. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. We'd been married 3 months, together for 2 years before that. He'd found me at a tech meetup where I'd been explaining my app concept to a circle of blank faces. Everyone else had seen a quiet woman with messy hair rambling about back-end architecture. Paul had seen something else entirely. He'd walked up to me after, handed me a coffee I hadn't asked for, and said 5 words that changed everything. I know people with money. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't poetry, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Paul finished his call and pumped his fist silently. Another potential investor interested. Another door cracked open. He dropped onto the couch, the only real furniture we had, and pulled me toward him. "You know what I love about you?" He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You see things nobody else can see, and I get to be the guy who shows the world." I leaned into him. At that moment, it felt like partnership, like 2 people building something together from nothing. The app launched 8 months later. By month 3, we'd hit 50,000 users. By month 6, 250,000. The tech blog started calling it revolutionary, simple, elegant, the kind of solution that made people wonder why nobody had thought of it before. Because nobody had a brain like mine, that's why. Paul handled everything else: the meetings, the pitch decks, the investor dinners where he wore confidence like a tailored suit. He was charming in ways I could never be, comfortable in rooms full of strangers, fluent in the language of money and ambition. And when we needed capital to scale, when the servers were crashing under demand and we were 60 days from bankruptcy, Paul did something I'd never forget. He sold his car. His Audi. The only thing he'd owned that was truly his, bought with 3 years of savings from his previous sales job. He came home that night with a cashier's check and a shrug. I'd stared at him, stunned. "You loved that car." He'd pulled me close. "Your brain is the investment, Brenda. I'm just the guy who answers phones." That was the man I married, the one who believed in me before anyone else, the one who made me feel like we were a team. I'd hold on to that memory for years. Even when everything else turned to ash, I'd remember that version of him existed once. It made the betrayal so much worse. The company grew, then it exploded. 3 years after launch, we moved into real offices, glass and chrome, exposed brick, the kind of space that looked expensive because it was. Paul's name was on the door. Technically mine was too, but visitors always assumed he was the founder. I was just someone technical, the quiet one in the corner who didn't come to parties. I didn't mind, not at first. The code was what mattered, the product, the thing I'd built from nothing. But Paul changed, slowly, then all at once. The suits got more expensive. The watch on his wrist cost more than our first apartment's annual rent. He started talking differently, dropping names, referencing golf games with investors, mentioning restaurants I'd never heard of. He was becoming someone else, someone who fit in rooms I'd never feel comfortable in. And then came the night I told him about the baby. I'd planned it carefully. Reservation at the Italian place where we'd had our first date, new dress, the positive test tucked in my purse like a secret. I waited until after the appetizers, hands trembling slightly under the table. I have something to tell you. Paul looked up from his phone. Hmm? I'm pregnant. The words hung there. I watched his face, searching for joy, wonder, something. He glanced at his phone again, typed a quick response to whoever had messaged him, then looked back at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's great, babe. We'll figure out the timing. Timing? Not father, not family, not even excited, just timing, like I told him about a scheduling conflict. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The gesture felt automated, something he'd learned to do. I smiled back, but something cracked inside me that night. Hairline fracture, almost invisible. Almost. Hannah Alcott arrived 6 weeks later. The conference room was full. Paul, me, the board, 3 lawyers. Standard investor meeting. I'd seen 100 of them, but I'd never seen anyone like Hannah. She walked in like she owned the building. Tailored blazer, heels that clicked with military precision, hair pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. She shook Paul's hand first, held it a beat too long. "Mr. Washburn, your reputation precedes you." Then she turned to me. The smile shifted, warmer on the surface, colder underneath. "And you must be the genius behind the code." She extended her hand. "The architecture of your app is remarkable, truly visionary." I shook it. Her grip was firm, almost challenging. "Thank you. It's been a team effort." Her eyes flickered, something like amusement. Of course it has. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Hannah had done her homework. She knew the numbers, the growth projections, the weak points in our current infrastructure. She asked questions that made the board members shift uncomfortably. But mostly she watched Paul, the way he commanded the room, the easy confidence, the smile that made people want to agree with him. And Paul watched her right back. I noticed, of course I noticed, but I told myself it was business. Hannah was an investor, an important one. Her fund could take us to the next level. At the end of the meeting, Hannah stood and smoothed her blazer. "I'm impressed. I think we can do great things together." She looked at me one more time, that measuring gaze, like she was calculating the value of everything in the room, including how much space I occupied. I smiled and thanked her, but something in her handshake lingered, like she was already measuring the space I occupied. The requests started small. Hannah needed access to the technical documentation, standard due diligence. I approved it without thinking. Then came the back-end credentials, just to understand the infrastructure. Paul said it was fine. Then came the logins. I noticed them at 11 at night when I couldn't sleep and decided to check the server logs. Someone had access to core codebase, the part that nobody touched except me. The login credentials belonged to Hannah. I mentioned it to Paul the next morning, casual, curious. He didn't look up from his breakfast. "She's an investor, babe. She needs to understand what she's investing in. But nobody needs to access the core architecture for investment purposes." He sighed. That sigh I was starting to hate, the one that meant I was being difficult. "You're overthinking this. Hannah's a professional. She knows what she's doing." I let it drop, but I didn't forget. Nina noticed too. Nina Cabrera had been my assistant for 2 years. Officially, she handled scheduling and administrative tasks. Unofficially, she was the only person in the building I trusted completely. She came into my office that afternoon, closed the door quietly, and sat down. "Something's wrong." Her voice was low. "Hannah requested copies of the technical documentation yesterday, all of it, including the proprietary frameworks." My stomach tightened. "Did you send them?" I delayed. Said there was a formatting issue, but Paul approved the request directly this morning. We sat in silence for a moment. Nina leaned forward. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to start keeping copies of everything." I nodded slowly. "That's probably smart." Nina didn't say anything else, but she started keeping copies of everything. The erosion was gradual, so gradual that I almost didn't notice until I was already drowning. It started with the small things, the way Paul stopped asking about my day, the way he'd check his phone during dinner, smile at something on the screen, then tell me it was just work, the way he started coming home later, then later still. Then the traveling began, Conferences, investor meetings, strategic dinners, always with Hannah at his side. The first trip was 3 days in New York, meetings with East Coast investors. I offered to come. Paul had hesitated, just a beat too long. You should rest, babe. The baby. You've been tired. I hadn't been tired. I'd been working 14-hour days while growing a human being. There was a difference. But I let it go. The second trip was a week in Miami, fintech conference. Very important. Hannah had connections there. The third trip was San Francisco, then Chicago, then back to New York. Each time I asked to join. Each time Paul had a reason I shouldn't. We need her there, he explained after I pressed him one night. You know these people. She speaks their language. And what language is that? He'd looked at me with something close to pity. Business, Brenda. Something you've never really understood. The words landed like a slap. I'd built the product that made those business trips possible. I'd coded through nights and weekends and holidays while he was out charming people at dinners. I'd solved problems that would have bankrupted us 6 times over. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and went back to my laptop. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Not yet. I was 6 months pregnant, my ankles were swollen, my back ached constantly, and my husband was jetting around the country with a woman who looked at him like he was already hers. The exclusion started next. It was subtle at first. A meeting I wasn't invited to, an email chain I was accidentally left off of, a decision made without my input. Then it became a pattern. Important meetings were scheduled when I had doctor's appointments. Updates happened in conversations I wasn't part of. Decisions were made and presented to me as finished facts. You need to rest, Paul kept saying. Focus on the baby. We've got this handled. We. Not I. We. The worst part was watching Hannah slide into spaces that used to be mine. Hannah in the meetings with the big clients, Hannah presenting the quarterly projections, Hannah sitting in my old chair during board discussions asking questions about the technical roadmap like she'd built it herself. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said, actually, Brenda created that architecture. Nobody acknowledged that the woman growing larger by the day in the corner office was the reason any of them had jobs. I brought it up once, just once, during a leadership meeting where Hannah was explaining future product features. Actually, I'd said, leaning forward, that approach won't work with the current back-end structure. We'd need to refactor the entire authentication module. The room went quiet. Hannah smiled, that thin, patient smile she used when she was about to destroy someone professionally. I appreciate the input, but we've already consulted with the technical team. They believe it's feasible. The technical team was 4 junior developers who'd been hired 3 months ago. None of them had ever touched the core codebase. None of them understood the architecture well enough to make that assessment. But Paul was nodding along, and the board members were nodding along. And suddenly, I was the difficult one, the pregnant woman who couldn't let go, the founder who didn't understand that the company had outgrown her. I stopped speaking up after that. What was the point? The company holiday party was the first public humiliation. 300 people in a rented ballroom. Open bar, live band. The kind of event that said, we've made it, without having to say it out loud. I stood in the corner, sparkling water in hand, watching the room I'd helped build fill with people who barely acknowledged me. A few employees nodded in my direction, polite, distant. The kind of acknowledgement you give to someone's wife, not someone's founder. I watched Paul work the room, handshake here, laugh there, arm around shoulders like they were old friends. He was in his element, glowing, magnetic. Hannah stayed close to him all night. Not too close, professional distance, but always within reach, always sharing the same conversations, always laughing at the same moments. A young account manager approached me around 9. Mrs. Washburn, right? He was nervous, new hire probably. I just wanted to say, I heard you were involved in the early days of the company. Involved? I'd built the company while my husband made phone calls. I'd coded through a miscarriage scare. I'd fixed a catastrophic server failure at 3 a.m. while running a fever. Involved? I smiled. Yes, I'm still involved. He nodded, already looking for an exit from the conversation. That's really cool. Well, enjoy the party. He disappeared into the crowd. Hannah took the stage for the annual toast. To an incredible year, she raised her glass, smile radiant. and to the new phase we're entering, leaner, more focused, ready to dominate. She named the board members, the key investors, the sales team, the marketing director who'd only been there 4 months, the operations manager Paul had hired from his golf club. She didn't mention me once. Paul stood beside Hannah, champagne in hand, nodding along. He didn't correct her, didn't add anything, didn't say, and of course, my wife, who built the product we're all here celebrating tonight, just smiled like everything was exactly as it should be. I set down my glass and left early. The band was playing something upbeat, people were dancing, nobody noticed the founder slip out through the service entrance. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. My hands were shaking too badly. Not from sadness, something else entirely. That night, I confronted him. She didn't mention me at all. I'm the founder, Paul. I built the thing she's toasting. He rubbed his eyes like I was exhausting him. You're being hormonal. Hannah's a professional. This is just business. Hormonal. The word hung in the air between us. Poison dressed as explanation. I felt something shift inside me. Not the baby. Something else. Something harder. I went to bed without another word, but I didn't sleep. The board meeting happened 2 weeks later. I'd prepared for it. Notes on the new feature rollout, technical specifications, timeline projections, diagrams I'd spent 3 days perfecting. This was my domain, my expertise, my chance to remind everyone that I wasn't just Paul's pregnant wife. But when I walked in, Hannah was already at the whiteboard. Perfect timing. Her smile was bright and sharp. I was just about to present our product roadmap. Our product roadmap. I sat down slowly. Something cold settled in my stomach. The presentation unfolded like a nightmare. Every slide contained ideas I recognized, things I'd mentioned in private conversations with Paul, late-night discussions about where the app could go, what features would matter, what problems we should solve next. The integration with banking APIs, I'd sketched that architecture on a napkin 6 months ago. The machine learning features for user behavior, I'd explained that concept to Paul while we were cooking dinner one night. The enterprise security package, I'd written a 12-page proposal that Paul had said he'd read later. Hannah presented them all as hers. Original strategic vision, revolutionary thinking. My throat tightened. My prepared notes sat untouched in front of me. I tried to interject. Actually, I had suggested something similar. Paul cut me off. Let's hear her out first, babe. Babe? In front of the entire board? Like I was a child interrupting adult conversation? The room shifted. I saw it in their faces, the subtle embarrassment, the secondhand discomfort, the look people get when they're witnessing something awkward and can't wait for it to be over. The meeting ended with applause for Hannah's vision, board members shaking her hand, Paul beaming like a proud father at a school play. I gathered my notes in silence. Nobody asked about my technical specifications. Nobody wanted to hear my timeline projections. Nobody cared that I'd spent 3 days preparing for a meeting that had lasted 40 minutes and hadn't needed me at all. I cornered Paul in his office afterward. Those were my ideas. Every single one. I told you about them, in private, in our home. He leaned back in his chair. That expression again, the one that made me feel small. Brenda, ideas are worthless. Execution is everything. Hannah is executing. By presenting my concepts as hers? He sighed. If you want credit, maybe show up more. You've been distracted. Distracted? I was building a human being inside my body while keeping his company alive, while fixing bugs at 2 a.m, while answering technical questions from junior developers who didn't know which end of a database was up, while my husband jetted around the country with another woman, and he called it distracted. I left his office without responding. There was nothing left to say. He'd made his choice perfectly clear. But something had changed in me too. Something had hardened. I just needed time to figure out what to do with it. Nina called me into a private meeting 3 days later. The conference room on the 4th floor, the one nobody used because the AC was broken and the windows faced an alley, perfect for conversations that couldn't be overheard. Nina was already there, laptop open, face pale. She'd closed all the blinds. "I didn't want to show you this." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've been debating for a week whether to tell you, but you need to see who you're dealing with." I sat down across from her. My heart was pounding, though I didn't know why. Some animal instinct warning me that what came next would change everything. Nina turned the screen toward me. Messages, dozens of them, screenshots, between Paul and Hannah. Not business, not even close. The first one hit me like a physical blow. "I can't stop thinking about last night." "Then don't stop." I kept reading. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "She's getting suspicious." "Let her. She's too pregnant and too tired to fight. You don't know her like I do." "I know her well enough. She's a coder. She doesn't understand people. That's why she needs you." Needed me. Past tense. My vision blurred. I blinked hard. Kept reading. There were more. So many more. Pet names, inside jokes, plans, promises. A message about a hotel room in Miami during the FinTech conference. A message about sneaking away during the holiday party. While I'd been standing alone in the corner, my husband had been in the parking garage with another woman. A message about the future. "Once the baby comes, she'll step back naturally. We just need to be patient. Then the company is ours." Ours. Not his, not even Hannah's alone. Ours. Like they were already a couple, like the company I'd built was just another asset in their portfolio. I read the last message 3 times. "I love you. I've never felt this way before." Paul had written that, to Hannah, while his wife was home preparing the nursery for their child. I closed the laptop gently. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear traffic. Inside, just the broken AC humming its useless rhythm. "Thank you, Nina." Her eyes were wet. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I should." "You did the right thing." "What are you going to do?" I stood up. My hand rested on my belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, like it knew, like it was telling me to pay attention. "I'm going to do what I always do." I met Nina's eyes, held them steady. "I'm going to build something." Nina nodded slowly. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was real. "I know you are. That's why I'm going to need your help." I saw them 3 days later. I hadn't meant to. I'd come to Paul's office to drop off some server reports. Late afternoon. The hallway was quiet. Most of the team had left early for some company happy hour I hadn't been invited to. His door was open, just a crack. I heard Hannah laugh, low and intimate, nothing like the sharp professional tone she used in meetings. This was a different laugh, private, comfortable. My feet stopped moving before my brain told them to. I should leave. I should turn around and walk away and pretend I'd never been here. But I stepped closer instead. Through the gap, I could see them. Paul standing by his desk, Hannah in front of him, close enough to touch, his hand on her waist, fingers curled around the expensive fabric of her blazer, her head tilted back, his lips on her neck. I watched her eyes flutter closed, watched Paul pull her closer. They looked comfortable, practiced, like they'd done this 100 times, 1,000, like this was their routine, their normal. I stood frozen. 1, 2, 3. I counted the seconds, each one stretching forever. In those 3 seconds, 4 years of marriage replayed in my mind. The wedding, the late nights building the company, the hope, the plans, the future we'd talked about while lying in bed together. All of it, gone. Reduced to this, my husband kissing another woman in the office my code had paid for. I didn't enter, didn't gasp, didn't announce myself. I turned around and walked back to my office. My footsteps were steady. My breathing was even. Anyone watching would have thought I was just returning from a routine errand. Inside, something was different. Something had cracked all the way through. I sat down at my desk. The server reports were still in my hand. I set them aside, opened my laptop. The cursor blinked, waiting. I started typing. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and started typing. Lines of code, architecture diagrams, a new file structure, the skeleton of something that didn't exist yet, something that would be entirely mine. The final phase happened fast. Paul and Hannah stopped pretending there were boundaries. Decisions flowed around me like water around a stone. New contracts signed without my review. I found out about a partnership with a major bank from a press release, read about my own company's expansion plans in TechCrunch. New team members appeared overnight, faces I didn't recognize, sitting in meetings I wasn't invited to, voices in the hallway discussing projects nobody had told me about. Nina kept me informed, quietly, carefully, slipping into my office with updates delivered in whispers. They're restructuring the executive team, Nina told me one evening, creating a new CTO position. They're interviewing external candidates. A CTO position to replace the founder who'd built everything they were selling. I nodded. Keep me posted. Hannah hired a technical support team, 5 programmers brought in from a consulting firm, fresh faces with fresh NDAs and no loyalty to anyone but whoever signed the checks. They started appearing in the codebase, asking questions, requesting access to modules, documenting everything. One of them cornered me in the break room. Young guy, eager, probably had no idea what he was really being asked to do. "Hey, I was looking at the authentication module," he said. "There's this recursive function I can't figure out. It calls itself 6 times, but I can't find where the base case is defined." I knew exactly which function he meant. I'd written it at 3 in the morning after figuring out an elegant solution to a problem everyone else said was unsolvable. The base case is contextual. It's defined by the state of the parent process. He stared at me blankly. I didn't elaborate. They were mapping my work, trying to turn my brain into a manual, making me replaceable. But some things couldn't be documented. Some things only existed in the mind that created them. For 3 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I played the role they expected: tired pregnant woman, distracted founder, the wife who was stepping aside gracefully to focus on her family. At night, I became someone else. The new project started the day after I saw Paul and Hannah together. Not a copy of my old work, something entirely new. The version of the app I'd always wanted to build but never had time for. I'd always compromised, cut features to meet deadlines, simplified architecture to accommodate less talented developers, made it good enough instead of making it great. Now there was no one to compromise for. Nina worked alongside me, every night, every weekend. We set up a small workspace in my second bedroom, between the half-assembled crib and boxes of baby clothes. 2 laptops, a whiteboard covered in diagrams, a mini fridge stocked with caffeine-free alternatives that did absolutely nothing to keep us awake. The new app took everything I'd learned in 4 years and pushed it further. Cleaner architecture, the kind I'd sketched in notebooks during boring meetings but never had time to implement. Faster processing, algorithms I'd theorized about but never tested because there was always another crisis to handle. Features I dreamed about, integrations that would make the old product look like a prototype. I wasn't stealing anything. I was improving on myself. The lawyers confirmed it multiple times. Grace Nakamura specialized in tech IP. She'd reviewed everything with the intensity of someone who expected to defend it in court. "Your original employment contract has no non-compete clause." Grace actually smiled when she said it. Unusual oversight for a company this size. "And any code you write on your own time, on your own equipment, belongs to you. Standard work for hire rules only apply to work done within scope of employment." What about similarity to the existing product? Different code base, different architecture, inspired by similar concepts, but that's not illegal. Grace slid a document across the table. "You can't copyright an idea, only its expression, and your new expression is entirely original." She'd handed over a folder of case law, precedents, similar situations that had been tested in court. "You're clean, Brenda. Whatever they try to throw at you won't stick." The divorce papers came next. California law, no prenup, community property, half of everything. But I didn't want half of a sinking ship. I wanted to be gone before it went down. I asked for only what I'd brought to the marriage, my personal savings, my car, my share of the original company equity, the shares I'd earned as founder before Paul started diluting them. Grace had looked surprised. You could get much more. I don't want more. I want clean. The investor came through Nina's connections. Carol Chen had made her fortune in enterprise software in the 90s, sold her company at the peak of the bubble, spent the next 2 decades backing founders that the traditional VC world overlooked. Women, minorities, anyone who'd been told they didn't belong. We met for coffee at a small cafe in Palo Alto. Carol was 72 years old, silver-haired, wearing sneakers with her blazer because she said heels were a scam invented by people who never had to stand. I pitched for 20 minutes. Carol asked 3 questions, sharp ones, the kind that revealed whether you actually understood what you were building. Then she nodded. I'm in. She slid a term sheet across the table. I've heard rumors about what's happening at your old company. I don't invest in rumors. I invest in people. She tapped the paper. You're the real thing, Brenda. I knew it the moment you started talking about the technical architecture. Your husband never could have explained it like that. The funding closed quietly. No announcements, no press releases. Just money in an account and a ticking clock until launch. The final piece was the thing Paul would never understand. The original app, the foundation his entire company stood on, had a dependency buried deep in its core. A custom library I'd built myself. Nothing malicious, nothing sabotaged. Just elegant and complex. Incredibly complex. I'd never documented it properly. There was never time. I was always putting out fires, building new features, doing the work of 3 people while Paul took credit for 1. Now that lack of documentation would become my protection. The new tech team might figure it out eventually, maybe, with enough time and enough talented engineers and enough luck. But by then, it would be too late. Paul called me 2 days before I left. Hey babe, just checking in. How are you feeling? I was sitting in my new office, small, rented, a room above a coffee shop that smelled like espresso and ambition. Better, much better. I think the rest was exactly what I needed. That's great, he sounded relieved. We should have dinner soon, talk about everything. Sure, I'd like that. We hung up. Nina looked at me from across the room. She'd been there the whole time, reviewing contracts. He has no idea, does he? I smiled. None. I had moved on, just not in the direction he expected. Paul took me to lunch that Friday. Nice restaurant, linen napkins, witnesses everywhere. He reached across the table and took my hand. His voice was gentle, concerned. I've been thinking about you, about us, about the baby coming. I watched his face, looking for any trace of the man who'd sold his car to fund my dream. Nothing. I think you should take your maternity leave early. You've earned it. Focus on the baby. We've got this handled. We. His thumb stroked my knuckles, the gesture that used to make me feel safe. I know the last few months have been hard, he continued. Work has been crazy. I haven't been as present as I should be, but things will get better. I promise. I studied him, the practiced sincerity, the performance of concern. You're right, I smiled. I think I do need a break. He looked relieved, actually relieved, like I'd just solved a problem for him. He signed the temporary leave papers that afternoon, hugged me in his office, told me he was proud of me for taking care of myself. Hannah watched from across the room, that measuring gaze, calculating. He mistook my silence for surrender. It was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. They celebrated the moment I signed the temporary leave papers. I wasn't there, of course, but Nina told me everything. Hannah opened champagne in Paul's office, the expensive stuff, Dom Perignon, the kind I'd always thought was wasteful for a Tuesday afternoon. To new beginnings, Hannah had said, clinking glasses with Paul, to finally moving forward. They kissed, right there in his office, door wide open, like they didn't need to hide anymore. Why would they? The obstacle had removed herself. Hannah moved fast after that. She was in technical meetings daily, asking questions about the architecture, demanding explanations of systems she'd never bothered to understand before. The new tech team tried to oblige. Tried. This API call, one of them explained during a session Nina secretly recorded, it connects to 6 different services, but I can't figure out the order of operations. It seems to change based on, I don't know, the weather? It's not random, another programmer said. It's some kind of dynamic prioritization, but the algorithm isn't documented anywhere. Because it existed only in my mind, built through years of iteration, refined by instinct, the kind of knowledge that couldn't be reverse engineered from the comments in the code. Hannah grew frustrated. How is this possible? It's just software. We have the source code. The lead programmer hesitated. Ma'am, having the code and understanding the code are 2 different things. Whoever built this, they were thinking on a level I've never seen. It's like trying to read someone's diary when they wrote it in a language they invented. Then find someone who can read it. They tried, brought in consultants, senior engineers, even a professor from Stanford who specialized in legacy systems. None of them could fully grasp what I had built. Meanwhile, Paul took Hannah to the Italian restaurant. Our Italian restaurant, the one where I told him about the baby. He posted a photo, not even trying to hide it anymore, just the 2 of them, wine glasses, candlelight. The caption, "Celebrating new partnerships." The comments were full of congratulations, business associates who didn't know, friends who didn't care. I saw it that night. I was sitting in my apartment, laptop balanced on what remained of my lap, 8 months pregnant now, swollen feet propped on pillows, back aching. For a moment, I felt it all. The weight of what I'd lost, the life I'd imagined, the future I'd believed in. I looked at the photo for a long time. Paul's smile, Hannah's hand on his arm, the restaurant where he'd seemed so distracted by his phone while I told him I was carrying his child. Then I put the phone down. I placed my hand on my belly. The baby kicked, strong, insistent. "Hello, little one," I spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Your dad's an idiot, but you and me, we're going to be fine." I picked up my phone and called Nina. "Is everything ready?" Nina's voice was steady, almost excited. "All of it. The lawyers signed off yesterday. The new company is registered. Carol transferred the first tranche this morning." "Good." I closed my laptop, because I'm done waiting. They thought I was home crying. I was home coding. The morning I left was quiet. 6 a.m., December. The building was empty except for a handful of security guards and one cleaning crew member vacuuming the lobby. I'd planned it for a Tuesday, middle of the week, everyone's guard down, no one expecting anything dramatic. I walked through the corridors I'd helped design, past the server room I'd built from nothing, rows of blinking lights that processed millions of transactions because of code I'd written in a cramped apartment that smelled like pizza and ambition, past the conference rooms where I'd pitched investors and convinced board members and fought for every feature, where I'd stood in front of whiteboards explaining concepts that would change the industry, while men in expensive suits nodded and asked questions I'd already answered 3 times. Past my old office, someone had already moved a box in, getting ready to reassign my space. My badge had been deactivated the night before. I'd done it myself, one last act of control over something that had been mine. I stopped at Paul's office. The door was closed. He wouldn't be in for hours. He'd been coming in later and later since Hannah started spending nights at the penthouse. I slid an envelope under the door. Inside, divorce papers, notice of resignation, contact information from my attorney. No note, no explanation, no final words. I didn't need them. The security guard at the back entrance looked up as I approached, the same one from the early morning months ago when I'd worked until dawn on a critical bug fix. He'd brought me coffee then, told me I worked too hard. I handed him a folded bill. Thanks for not asking questions. He pocketed it, glanced at the small box in my hands. Good luck with whatever this is. I walked out into the December dawn. Cold air, pink sky, a city just waking up. A car was waiting, Nina at the wheel, engine running, heat blasting. "Ready?" Nina asked. I put my hand on my belly. The baby kicked, hard, impatient. "Let's go." The collapse began 3 days later. It started small, A glitch in the payment processing system, transactions timing out randomly. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to generate customer complaints. Hannah called an emergency meeting. The new technical team gathered around monitors, scrolling through error logs, trying to trace the source. "It's somewhere in the core architecture," the lead programmer said. His face was pale. He'd been awake for 30 hours. "But I can't figure out how these modules connect. There's no documentation for this section." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Then figure it out. That's what I'm paying you for." They tried. For a week they tried. They brought in consultants, senior engineers, anyone who might understand what they were looking at. Every fix created new problems. The system was a house of cards, and they couldn't tell which cards were structural. Pull one, and 3 others came tumbling down. The payment glitches became data synchronization failures. The data failures became authentication errors. The authentication errors became a cascading nightmare that touched every part of the platform. The first major client called on day 5. Paul took it in his office. Hannah listened on speaker, arms crossed, face tight. "We're concerned." The voice on the phone was calm but firm. "The CFO of a Fortune 500 company that accounted for 12% of their revenue. 3 critical failures in 1 week. Our contract requires 99.9% uptime. You're currently at 94%. We're addressing the issues." Paul's voice was smooth, practiced. "This is a temporary, we're pausing our partnership until we see stability." The line went dead. Paul stared at Hannah. "Get it fixed." "I'm trying." Her composure cracked for the first time. "But the code, it's like reading someone else's mind. Only one person really understood how it all connected." They both knew who she meant. I posted on a Wednesday. A simple photo. Me at a desk, laptop open, baby bump visible. Behind me, a whiteboard covered in diagrams that meant nothing to anyone but me. The caption? "New chapter, new code. Details coming soon." No tags, no company name, no explanation. It didn't matter. Within 12 hours, the post had 50,000 likes. The comments were flooded. "Is she starting something new? Wait, wasn't she the technical founder? What happened? Did she leave the company? I heard rumors." The tech journalist started calling. I didn't answer, but my old clients did. My DMs filled with messages from contacts I'd built over 4 years, engineers who remembered me from conferences, product managers who'd watched my demos, CTOs who knew exactly who had built the platform they depended on. "Heard you're working on something new. We'd love to talk. Whatever you're building, we want first look. Is the old product going to be okay without you?" That last question kept appearing, over and over. The timing couldn't have been better. Paul showed up at my apartment 2 days after the post. I opened the door slowly. I was wearing sweats, no makeup, 8 months pregnant and absolutely done pretending. He looked terrible. Suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes red. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked. "You're destroying everything we built." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as still water. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just building something else. You should try it sometime." "Brenda, please." He stepped forward. I didn't move. "We can talk about this, work something out. The company needs you." The company, not him, not our marriage. The company. "Like we talked about Hannah?" I kept my voice even. "Like we talked about pushing me out of my own company? Like we talked about waiting until the baby came so I'd step back naturally?" He flinched. "That wasn't... I didn't mean for it to..." "You didn't mean for me to find out. There's a difference." "I love you." The words hung there, empty, meaningless, a currency that had lost all its value. "No, Paul." I shook my head slowly. "You loved what I could do for you. Once you found someone who could do more, you moved on." I smiled. "The only difference is that I'm moving on too." I closed the door. For a full minute, I heard him standing there, breathing, maybe thinking about knocking again, maybe thinking about what to say. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't watch him go. The desperation at Paul's company reached its peak in week 3. Brenda stood in the tech bullpen screaming at That last question kept appearing, over and over. The timing couldn't have been better. Paul showed up at my apartment 2 days after the post. I opened the door slowly. I was wearing sweats, no makeup, 8 months pregnant and absolutely done pretending. He looked terrible. Suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes red. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked. "You're destroying everything we built." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as still water. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just building something else. You should try it sometime." "Brenda, please." He stepped forward. I didn't move. "We can talk about this, work something out. The company needs you." The company, not him, not our marriage. The company. Like we talked about Hannah? I kept my voice even. Like we talked about pushing me out of my own company? Like we talked about waiting until the baby came so I'd step back naturally? He flinched. I didn't mean for it to... You didn't mean for me to find out. There's a difference. I love you. The words hung there, empty, meaningless, a currency that had lost all its value. "No, Paul," I shook my head slowly. "You loved what I could do for you. Once you found someone who could do more, you moved on." I smiled. The only difference is that I'm moving on too. I closed the door. For a full minute, I heard him standing there, breathing, maybe thinking about knocking again, maybe thinking about what to say. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't watch him go. The desperation at Paul's company reached its peak in week 3. Brenda stood in the tech bullpen screaming at programmers who'd been working 20-hour days. "How is this possible?" Her voice echoed off the walls. "It's just code." A young engineer, exhausted beyond the point of caring, answered her. "Ma'am, this code, it's like reading someone else's mind. The architecture is brilliant, but it's personal. Every function connects the 5 others in ways that aren't obvious. Only one person understands how this all connects, and she's gone." Hannah looked at the empty desk in the corner, the one that used to be mine. Someone had put a plant there. It was already dying. For the first time, Hannah understood the difference between owning a company and building one. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Paul and Hannah filed an emergency injunction. The legal document was 30 pages long, full of accusations that painted me as a thief, a saboteur, a disgruntled employee who'd stolen the company's most valuable assets. Trade secret misappropriation, breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference with business relations. They held a press conference the same day, Paul in his best suit, Hannah beside him, radiating righteous anger. "We built something incredible together." Paul's voice shook with practiced emotion. "My wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, was part of that. But what she's done, it's a betrayal of everything we stood for." Hannah took over. "We have evidence that proprietary code was copied, trade secrets were stolen. We will pursue every legal avenue to protect what we've built." The reporters ate it up. Bitter divorce leads to tech theft allegations. Founder accuses wife of corporate espionage. Startup civil war, husband versus wife in $1 million lawsuit. For 48 hours, the narrative was theirs. I watched it unfold from my apartment. Nina sat beside me, refreshing news feeds, face tight with fury. "They're destroying your reputation." My hand rested on my belly. Let them. Then my lawyers responded. A single press release, 3 pages, accompanied by 400 pages of documentation. The code in Miss Washburn's new product shares 0 lines with her previous work. Architecture is entirely original, developed after her departure from the company on personal equipment outside work hours. Timestamps on all development files have been verified by independent forensic analysts from Stanford's computer science department. Furthermore, Ms. Washburn's original employment contract contains no non-compete clause and no assignment of intellectual property created outside the scope of her employment. We invite any technical expert to compare the 2 code bases. They will find nothing in common except the exceptional mind that created them both. The forensic analysis was devastating. Side-by-side comparisons showed completely different code structures, different programming approaches, different solutions to similar problems. The new product used technologies that didn't even exist when I was still at the old company. It wasn't a copy. It wasn't even an evolution. It was something entirely new, something better. The tech community turned fast. This isn't theft. This is a woman who built something twice because her husband tried to steal it from her the first time. She was the founder. Everyone in the industry knew she was the genius behind the code, and they tried to push her out. Look at the architecture comparison. The new version is cleaner, more elegant. She didn't steal anything. She improved on herself. Then the messages leaked. Nina had kept copies of everything, every text between Paul and Hannah, every email discussing how to dilute my shares, every conversation about waiting until the baby came. The screenshots spread across Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn, every tech forum that mattered. Once the baby comes, she'll step back naturally. We just need to be patient. Then the company is ours. She's too pregnant and too tired to fight. She's a coder. She doesn't understand people. That's why she needs you. The narrative didn't just flip, it exploded. Founder pushed out by husband and investor built better product in her living room. Leaked texts reveal plot to steal pregnant founder's company. The real story behind the tech world's ugliest divorce. Paul tried damage control. More interviews, more statements, a carefully crafted apology that didn't actually apologize for anything. The messages were taken out of context, he said on the podcast. We were going through a difficult time. I said things I didn't mean. Nobody was listening anymore. The final humiliation came in a courtroom 3 weeks later. I sat at the defendant's table, Nina beside me, Grace arranging documents with the calm efficiency of someone who knew she'd already won. Across the aisle, Paul and Hannah with their own legal team, 4 lawyers in expensive suits who charged a fortune to lose spectacularly. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on. She reviewed the forensic analysis, examined the employment contracts, listened to technical experts explain in painstaking detail why the 2 code bases had nothing in common except brilliance. Then she looked at Paul. Mr. Washburn, her voice was flat, unimpressed. Your attorneys have presented no evidence of code theft. The defendant's work is demonstrably original. Timestamps prove development occurred after her departure on personal equipment outside any scope of previous employment. Paul's lawyer tried to interject. Your Honor, we believe the judge held up a hand. I'm not finished. She removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a pattern of behavior by the plaintiffs that borders on harassment, pursuing legal action without merit, making public accusations without foundation, attempting to damage the reputation of a pregnant woman who committed the crime of being more talented than the people trying to replace her. The courtroom was silent. Case dismissed with prejudice. The judge's gavel came down hard. Plaintiffs are ordered to pay defendants' legal fees. All of them. Hannah's lawyers began packing immediately. Hannah herself sat frozen, staring at nothing. Paul looked at me for the first time since the proceedings began. I was already standing, already gathering my things, already moving on. I didn't look back. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded with journalists. Hannah pushed through them without a word. Her heels clicked against marble like gunshots retreating. Paul lingered. A reporter caught him at the elevator. Mr. Washburn, do you have any comments on the dismissal? He opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time in his life, Paul Washburn had nothing to sell. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed on his face. That footage played on every tech news site for a week. The collapse accelerated after that. Without my reputation, without my technical credibility, without the genius that had built everything they were selling, the company hemorrhaged. Clients left. First in a trickle, then a flood. The new technical team worked around the clock, but couldn't stabilize a system they didn't understand. Within 3 months, they'd lost 60% of enterprise contracts. The valuation dropped by half, then half again, then again. Investors demanded explanations. Board members resigned. The company that had been worth hundreds of millions of dollars was suddenly worth almost nothing. Hannah tried to pivot, new products, new market, new strategy, but building something from nothing wasn't something she knew how to do. She knew how to take, how to acquire, how to leverage. Creating required a different kind of talent. The last major investor pulled out in month 4. The board voted to restructure. Paul was removed as CEO, a title he'd given himself when no one was paying attention. Hannah stayed on as interim leadership, but there was nothing left to lead. The company that I'd built in a cramped apartment filed for bankruptcy protection 8 months after I walked out the back door. 6 months after the morning I walked out, I sat in my new office. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was open, modern, filled with the quiet hum of focused work. My team, my real team, people I'd chosen myself, occupied desks throughout the floor. In the corner, a bassinet, my daughter, 3 months old, sleeping peacefully. Nina knocked on the doorframe. The numbers from this morning, we closed 3 new enterprise contracts this week. I took the report, scanned it, nodded. And the product launch tomorrow? Ready. Nina grins. Full teams prepped. Press releases scheduled, demo environment tested. Good. Nina paused. At the door. There's something else. Thought you might want to see it. She handed me her phone. A photo from a tech industry newsletter. A small convention center, third-tier tech fair, the kind of event that charged exhibitors for table space and drew mostly students and hobbyists. In the photo, a modest booth, cheap banner, folding table covered with flyers. Behind it stood Paul and Hannah. They were demonstrating something on a tablet, some kind of app, small, generic, the kind of thing a college student might build for a class project. 3 people stood in front of their booth, maybe 4. I studied the photo. Paul looked older, tired. The expensive suit was gone, replaced with business casual that didn't quite fit right. Hannah stood beside him, smile frozen in place, eyes hollow. A young man walked past their booth, glanced at it, then looked at his friend and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I could imagine. Isn't that the guy who lost his company to his own wife? I handed the phone back to Nina. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated. Didn't feel much of anything, really. I'd stopped thinking about Paul months ago. The divorce was finalized, the legal battles were over. He existed now only as a signature on custody documents and a lesson I'd never forget. My daughter stirred in her bassinet, small sounds, not quite crying, just waking up. I walked over and lifted her gently, warm weight against my chest, tiny fingers curling. The notification on my phone buzzed, an article. Tech Monthly's feature on founders who'd rebuilt from zero. I read the headline, smiled briefly, and closed the app. There would be time for interviews later, time for the story to be told the way it actually happened, time for all of it. But not now. Now, my daughter needed feeding, and in an hour, my team needed final approval on the launch materials, and tomorrow, the product I'd built, truly built, from nothing, on my own terms, would go live. I picked up my phone and texted Nina, "Ready for tomorrow's launch?" The response came back immediately, "Born ready." I smiled. Outside my window, the city moved on, traffic and ambition and a million small dramas playing out in offices and apartments and cars. Somewhere out there, Paul was probably rehearsing his pitch for some minor investor, trying to rebuild something from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. I hoped he figured it out someday, genuinely, not for his sake, but because bitterness was heavy and I'd carried enough weight for one lifetime. But that was his journey now, his problem, his story. I had my own to write. The baby yawned. I held her close and watched the sun climb higher over the skyline. I didn't leave to hurt him. I left to save myself. The fact that he was destroyed was just a side effect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.